everyone. We see everyone's starting to roll in. We're here discussing the weather. Hope that wherever you are, you're having a nice day today.
Yes. We're loving our blue screens behind us. If you're not in good weather, hopefully this will make you feel like you are.
Exactly. All
Uh,
right. Excellent. We'll give everyone a couple more minutes to roll in and then we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. I know, well, it's so different depending on where you are, but I know a couple of the schools I've been talking with are on spring break. So if you are somebody on spring break and you're here, one, we are so happy you're here. And two, hopefully you're having a good spring break.
Yeah. All right, let's take it away.
Sounds good.
All
If you
right.
go ahead. Sorry, Karen. I was going to say, if you want to move to that next slide and go ahead and just kind of start talking about Motivity while people are trickling in.
Excellent, excellent.
Okay, perfect. So like Karen and I have been kind of saying, as people are joining, we're super to talk to everybody today about using Motivity in the classroom. So while people are still joining, we'll just give a little bit of background on Motivity. Motivity has been around since about 2015. We are completely funded by grants through the National Institute of Health. And what that allowed us to do was build a system that was really reliable, but also really flexible. So Motivity was created from or by computer scientists in collaboration with BCBAs. And so you see that speed, efficiency, reliability from our computer scientists, and then all of the clinical flexibility on the BCBA side. Motivity is 100% clinical data collection, which means that we can dedicate 100% of our time. So our engineering effort, our customer support, everything that we're doing is all dedicated to clinical data collection. One of the things that I'm really proud about for working with Motivity is we are always meeting with industry experts on how we can continue to make sure that we're meeting industry needs. So within the realm of special education or just clinicians that are providing services for the population of developmental disabilities, all of those different services that are being provided and need data collection, we're collaborating with those experts. So rather than replicating maybe what's out there, we're trying to figure out what clinicians and teachers really need, and that's how we determine the different features that we're building, all of which are backed by the National Institute of Health, which is really, really incredible.
Yeah, it's really fun because everything that we claim has to be backed up by clinical data because in order to receive our funding, we need to submit that clinical data to the National Institute of Health. And as a behavior analyst, that is something that I get really happy over. That's actually a perfect segue to a little introduction about the two of us. So my name is Cara Leckleiter. I am Director of Sales at Motivity and a BCBA. I have been in the industry for almost 20 years at this point. Started out on the clinical side, but for the past decade or so, I have been really focused on the technology side. And I am often flabbergasted how even in the span of my own career, we have really seen this shift toward technology and toward tools that really make data-driven teaching so much easier. I am also a licensed teacher. I have my license in severe special needs for grades K through 12, and I was a classroom teacher for a while as well. So I bring all of that knowledge and experience into this role, and just super excited to show you the things that get me really happy and excited about Motivity.
Thanks, Kara. My name's Catherine Martin. I'm a BCBA and of course on Motivity's team. I had the really fortunate experience just in my time in the field of working in a variety of populations. Majority of the time I've been working in school settings or had been working in school settings was when I was either providing direct services or as a student candidate getting my certification. Schools definitely have a special place in my heart. I was always trying to figure out what's the next school I can get into. Public schools and their ABA programs, private schools, and then residential and day program and day schools. So really have a special place in my heart. But what was really exciting about working with Cara on this project is collaborating with special education teachers. So Cara herself, as well as some of our other staff, as well as people using Motivity, and just learning so much about each district's needs, each teacher's needs, each BCBA's in that school, meaning school settings needs are just so different. And Motivity being always able to, oh yeah, that's how we can do that, or yeah, that's how we'll do that, was really, really exciting. But love being able to collaborate with the people that are using the services in these different settings.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to share with you all today. And that being said, please, we want to make this conversational. So right now, feel free to use that chat. We are just very curious to know who is here, what is your role, what is the setting that you work in, just so we understand who we're talking to today. I mean, I think when it comes to data-driven teaching, we all really understand that why. We know why it's important, especially if it's mostly BCBAs on the call. We understand the reason that we're going to advocate for data collection and make sure that what we're doing is effective and efficient for our learners. That being said, we know that BCBAs that work in the school setting do face a number of challenges when it comes to advocating for and implementing data collection. Something that I always think about is progress tracking really is a legal requirement in the schools through IDEA. We need to show IEP progress toward our goals. But at the same time, we do see that, especially in a school setting, there is a lot of pushback. So the question is why? Why is it not widely adopted? Why are so many school districts out there still using paper pencil? And when Catherine and I were talking about this and really reaching out to our current customers and everyone else that we know in the field, trying to learn about why, what are these challenges, we think that the main thing that comes up again and again is that people working in a school setting in an ABA classroom or an ABA program don't have the right tools. They don't have things that address the problem that's right in front of them. And Catherine and I truly feel that Motivity is that tool that could address a lot of these issues. And we know this for a fact because we have a lot of school-based behavior analysts that are implementing Motivity in their setting. So what we thought would be a really fun way to go through this webinar is to present some of the common issues that are faced in a school setting, and then talk about an actual customer story, talk about how they're using Motivity to overcome that barrier. And then the really fun part is Catherine's going to hop onto the system and show you an actual example. So again, we really want this to be collaborative. So if there are things that you can think of that we're not addressing, if there is anything you want to add to the conversation, please utilize the chat. We have a Q&A as well, and we have one of our Motivity customer success consultants, who she herself is a BCBA and special educator. She can answer some of those questions as well. So we are super excited to get started. So let's take a look at the first challenge that we hear all the time when it comes to utilizing data collection in a school-based setting. Is we hear this from many of our customers. I just don't have any time to train my staff in ABA data collection. So this first story, this is from a current customer in a public school. And when she came to look at Motivity and evaluate Motivity as her potential software, she was saying that she has multiple classrooms across multiple locations. I think that's very common for BCBAs in public school settings. And her paraprofessionals have very limited ABA background. And even for those that do have some background in it, they are just very hesitant to collect data. It's not something that they have a lot of experience in. It's different, it takes extra time. We all know about response effort. So she was looking for a solution that would be able to get these people on board and get them on board quickly and easily without having to really know a lot of ABA jargon. So the solution here is simplified automated data collection without any jargon. So Catherine, take it away and show us what that looks like on Motivity.
Absolutely. Also, thank you so much for the person who just communicated in the chat here about how you might want to improve or add data collection into what you're already doing in the school setting. And I think what I'll show you now is one way that we can help address those needs. Like Cara said, how can we simplify things so that all of these different people within that setting are able to collect data? So thank you for that little tidbit there. So to orient you to where I am now, I'm of course on Motivity, and I'm in a specific student that we're going to collect data on. On the left side here, we're going to see all of either our programs or goals. I know that language or terminology kind of varies depending on who you're talking to, but our programs or our goals are on our left side here. These would have been already identified for this learner, and they would have been added to this student's options for data collection, either from some of our libraries, which we'll show, or our program builder. So like I said, we're in the part here where somebody's just going to go in and actively be collecting data for this student. What we really want to show is how simplified data collection options can be on Motivity. So we're going to click into one of our goals or programs here. As I click into our program, all of the targets associated are in the middle, and then just that target I'm collecting data on is now available on the right side. And I got my lefts and rights correct that time. What we see here is a really clear idea of how staff are collecting data, regardless of if they have experience in ABA or not. How this program is set up is we're first going to be teaching this target. So all staff have to do on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday is simply identify if they taught this program. So we're going to kind of time travel a little bit. So let's say that today is Wednesday, which it is, and I'm going to say that, yes, I taught this today. Then now we're going to jump ahead to Thursday, and I'll be able to see, okay, I'm going to use the 3 dots to change to a data day phase. I'll simply go up here. I'm going to transition to a data day. Now that I'm in a day where I'm actually collecting that data, it is still extremely straightforward and simple. There's no language for SD in this example. We're simply just telling staff what you're going to be saying and what we want our student to do, and therefore what they're collecting data on. We see here the options for data collection include absolutely no jargon, a simple pass-fail for what your students are doing. And what that allows you to do, and what we've gotten feedback from the teachers using Motivity, is you're able to teach these targets on certain days and then maybe get some probe data on your data days. Here we can see, as I'm collecting data, everything in Motivity is real time. Each of these little blocks is just a placeholder for the trials that you saw as I was collecting them there. And that means it's already saved onto our server and already available for a graph. So we'll talk about this a little bit as we move on, but no running around to try to capture that data. Everything's real time and already stored and available for you. A few other features that make data collection simplified and really accessible to whoever's collecting it are we also have these detail sections. So if maybe you needed a little bit more instructions in addition to what you provided up at the top here, we also have these detail sections which you can include really more in-depth teaching instructions to be available right associated with that target or program, again, for whoever's collecting that data. So maybe you want to have a definition of what an error is, so it's really transparent for that staff going in and collecting data. A few other options we have here. So maybe we want to look at what are the accommodations for this specific student. Again, we're avoiding any sort of jargon here. We're simply saying, was this accommodation offered? Yes or no? And then was it accepted? So your staff don't have to at all be familiar with ABA in order to collect data on this specific target or goal that you're looking at, or simply just some additional information you need. So we can say, yes, it was offered, and yes, it was accepted. Here we can see if we're looking at accommodation related to extended time for tests, same thing. Was it simply accepted or declined, and what setting was that learner in? So you're able to get some additional information, which is really beneficial. If as a BCBA, you need to quickly see what's happening with this learner. But again, absolutely no jargon. We're simply able to capture the data that's needed there. An additional feature that can be really beneficial is a video feature that we have. So let's say we're going to include, oh, this is a really cool feature too. Sorry guys, I jumped ahead. So you can have images embedded right within programs in Motivity. And so in this example, we're looking at, is the student prepared for class? But maybe that looks different for each student. And so being able to include an image of what exactly is required for this specific learner is really beneficial. So if I'm that aide or that teacher collecting data, I could say my learner was, or my student was somewhat prepared for class, and maybe what they forgot was pencils. Less of a big deal than if they forgot their backpack, for example. As I was mentioning, we also have a video feature. So here we can see that we're looking at a least to most prompting hierarchy. As we were talking about, if maybe we're trying to avoid some of that jargon, this language might not be familiar for staff. So even though we have it written out, I know myself in particular, I'm a very visual learner. And so what we could do instead is actually hyperlink a video that will show the instructions of how we want this program to be run. I am going to mute it because it is myself, but what you're able to see here is still a breakdown of exactly what I want to happen here, as well as a video that's going to demonstrate what that hierarchy is in this example. So again, we're kind of removing barriers for any of our staff that are collecting that data. Finally, I'll very quickly mention that another way that we make data collection really accessible with Motivity is the ability to have these different training courses that are going to be relevant to the different staff taking them. All of these courses are, of course, free to anybody that has Motivity in their using Motivity for their school. And so you can see we have a teacher training where they're able to learn how to use the system. And then we also have trainings for BTs or frontline staff, even if you needed an aide, for example, where this is only about a 20 to 30-minute course where it just teaches somebody just how to collect data on Motivity. So not only does it make it accessible for those staff, it also reduces some of the time that you're having to spend on training the staff when we know you're already have so many things on your plate. All right, back to you, Cara.
Awesome. Yeah. And the feedback that we get on that 20-minute training is that it really is sufficient for teaching a frontline staff to hop on the system right away and start collecting data. And then in this particular example, the BCBA that is now using Motivity with her staff told us that, and this is a quote, the paraprofessionals were able to understand the system and use it without any difficulty and intensive training needed. So we're really excited about that. Challenge number 2. Each classroom I supervise has a different ABA skill set. Again, I think this is something that is very common in public schools and specialized schools, especially. So in this particular example here, we were working with a specialized school where the BCBA supervises educational programs that are spread across the country, spread across various locations. Some schools and some classrooms that she supervised were very skilled in ABA data collection. She could just throw a really complicated program their way and they were good to go. And then put simply, others simply are not. So she worked with her customer success consultant because she said, I want to be able to expect a certain level of data collection and data-driven teaching from all of these settings, but how do I do it in a way so that in my really skilled setting, I'm getting good data, and then in my not so skilled setting, I am also getting good data. Just for sake of this example, I'm going to talk about the 3 locations being an elementary, a middle school, and a high school, because I think probably some people on the call can relate to this. So let's just say that our elementary school, very skilled in ABA. Middle school, they're actively in training, they're not highly technical, whereas the high school staff has very limited experience. So in this case, the solution was to build out customized libraries and programs for each location. So what's really nice about these libraries is they are, of course, aligned to IEP goals so that the teachers and the staff are easily able to assign those goals to the learners. But even better, to take it a step further, these libraries are aligned to the specific staff skill sets. And then these libraries are based on location and role, so that that high school that's not quite skilled in ABA yet, they are only seeing programs that are accessible to them. And they are teaching similar skills, or they are teaching those IEP goals, but in a way that is not overwhelming. So Catherine will show us an example of what that looks like.
All right, I can see my screen taking a second. Perfect. Okay, so we are now, of course, back in Motivity. We are in the library section of Motivity. So all public schools, or all schools in general, that I say public schools because we call it Motivity Public School, all schools with Motivity have access to build these different libraries, as well as access to some community libraries, which we'll talk through if we have time. As Cara described, by organizing goals and programs based on library, it makes it for that clinician to really easily be able to assign goals to their students in that setting, but also know that they're tailoring it to the staff that are going to be expected to collect that data. So as a very quick overview, as you can see, I'm in our public school here and I'm in the library section. We have this separated into the different locations, and we know that districts can be huge. And so it doesn't just have to be maybe this elementary, high school, and middle school. I know Cara and I actually we don't live in the same town now, but I grew up in the town she's living in, and there's, I don't know, 3 elementary schools. And so you can, of course, build it to accommodate your needs as well. Again, for a high overview, maybe for the entire district, you want to have a library that just has some templates in there for staff to pull from. And maybe you even have a teacher library for special education or general education teachers who don't have a background in ABA, and they just have maybe some procedure templates that are even more parsed down and avoid any sort of ABA jargon. As Cara alluded to, by being able to organize your programs and goals based on these locations, it makes it really easy for a clinician to copy these goals to a learner. Within Motivity, we have all of these different roles and permissions, which we'll show in a little bit as well. And so let's say that I'm working in the elementary school, Cara's working in the middle school, maybe whoever is managing kind of the Motivity, they're just giving me access to the elementary school library, and Cara is just going to have access to that middle school library. So when we go into the system, we're only looking at things that are relevant to us. It also makes it helpful for whoever is monitoring things on an administrative side. You know that somebody from the elementary school isn't going in and accidentally messing something up or changing something in the high school, for example. So those roles and permissions are really key when not only helping organize your library, but also organizing how your staff are viewing and accessing those libraries. Back to the example Cara talked about, though, in our elementary school, we have staff that are highly trained in ABA. And so our goals can have a lot of jargon, and maybe our expectations for data collection also are a little bit more aligned with a standard DTT or even NET, a data collection type. As you can see here, when I'm clicking into a library, I see all of the programs or goals that are associated, and we just added a couple, of course, as an example. What we can see is a long-term goal as well as all of these references. So again, somebody who's not familiar with ABA, these references are not going to be very meaningful. If you are familiar and you know the VB map, you know exactly where these goals are coming from and pulling from. Once I identify a goal I'm interested in, I simply select it. And now I'm able to see a simulation view. So what will this look like for somebody who's actually going into that system and collecting data for the learner? And that's really beneficial so that as you're pulling programs from libraries, you know exactly what you're copying over. For this program, for example, we can see we have specific targets. We're using that jargon of SD, and we're in a baseline phase. With this simulation view, I can actually see what are my options in that train phase. What we can see here for our elementary school is we are keeping that full jargon, that standard least to most prompting hierarchy, because we expect, or maybe we know that our staff are able to collect that standard DTT or ABA data. In our middle school, they have some experience with ABA, or maybe they're beginning to be introduced, but don't have that same experience level as what our elementary school has. So we've not only put programs in here that are more relevant to the age range of the learners that they're working with, but we're trying to pull some of that ABA jargon out here. So you can see we don't necessarily have references to the VB map, and the actual names of the goals themselves are really accessible. You kind of know what they are without necessarily having to have a background in ABA. Again, once I identify a program I'm interested in, I simply select it. What you can see here is instead of having an entire prompting hierarchy, maybe we're looking at they got it wrong, they required some sort of a prompt, or they did it independently. So we are expecting them to gather a little bit more data, but again, it's removing some of that jargon. Finally, up at our high school level, we're really looking at making, again, our goals are relevant to the age of the students that are going to be in that high school, but also really accessible for the staff. And so they can look at these goals and they can have a really good idea of exactly what they're going to be collecting data on. To take this example a little bit further, I actually created a goal that's the same goal and how you might customize within Motivity based on these different locations that you're collecting data for. So if we look at this use first then program. For our elementary school level, we're back in that simulation view. And I've got really high expectations for my staff because they are trained in ABA. So what I'm expecting for those at the elementary school is that they can actually use what we call a countdown timer to collect data on the duration that the student is in activity. I want them to identify if a prompt was used, what type of prompt, and identify the activity the learner was participating in. So high expectations for my elementary school staff. Then when I get to the middle school, I took the exact same goal, but I'm going to modify and I'm going to customize my program to be a little bit more accessible for these staff. So I still want to see what's the duration that my student engaged in the activity, but all I want to know in this case is, did they do it independently? Did they require some support, or did they not engage at all? Finally, at my high school level, I kind of pulled things out even further. All I want to know is, did they engage? Did they need help? Or did they not engage at all? And what you can see is how we're able to use the program builder and use Motivity's programs to customize, again, based on location, as well as what is going to be accessible for the staff collecting data. As the high school learns more, then we can maybe add the middle school level program for that, and then hopefully eventually that elementary school. But it just allows you to really accommodate goals to get that data that you're looking for, rather than putting a really high expectation on a staff where maybe that data is then inaccurate or not collected at all because they're not even sure what they're looking at. We know how important it is, particularly in a school setting, to get that buy-in and make people feel like they're able to do what we're asking of them when they have a job that already requires a lot. Now, Cara, I know I'm a talker. Do you want me to quickly talk about our community libraries, or would you like to go to our next challenge?
Sure, let's have a high-level overview of our libraries. I love our libraries, so maybe I'm biased.
No, I love our libraries too. So very quickly, you saw that I just scrolled through a few of our different libraries, and we'll have a chance to go back to those. But all organizations and schools that work with Motivity have access to these 3 community libraries. The first one is our Motivity Community Library. And again, I'll keep this really high level. But the Motivity Community Library is really templates of shells of different skill acquisition, behavior reduction programs. You can filter by all of these different labels you see associated with our programs here. And just for the sake of time, I'll very quickly scroll through it just so you can have an idea of maybe the different goals or domains that are included. This library is completely built and monitored by our customer success team. Shout out to Amanda, who's on our call right now. But they're always building and adding to it. And it's a really fantastic library to be able to start with those kind of templates and then make all the customizations you need once you've assigned any of these programs, either into your own libraries or to a specific student.
And what I love about how this library is set up is it really is based off of the procedures and protocol. So for example, if you know you want to use a backwards chaining task analysis with errorless teaching, we already have that template in there for you. It's not specifically tied to a skill. It's just already set up to have all of those auto transitions built in. So it makes it so, so fast and easy to just grab it, customize it, and put in what you need for your organization's library or for your individual learner.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, Kara. Right up at the top here, I kind of skipped that. That's where you assign it directly to students or copy it into your own libraries and make any of those customizations. Very quickly, our second library here is the NBA Community Library. This is a current customer of Motivity that just generously offered to make their library available. This library is not only fantastic, it is also ginormous. So really fun to kind of play around and look in here. I find myself in here just about every day. Same thing, you can of course always filter by our different labels, and you can see here all of these different cognitive skills you might want to look at, executive functioning, and of course independent skills. So it kind of makes me think back to our high school library that we created, where maybe they're kind of starting to look at money skills or technology use or vocational skills. So some really, really cool programs in here that they've set up. Finally, we have the VB Map skill library. So this is the entire curriculum. So every skill across each domain and each milestone. Again, kind of thinking back to our elementary school library that we have there. Great for, of course, if you're working at that schools with younger students. If anybody has questions about these libraries, feel free to either use that Q&A or chat, or reach out to Kara and I afterwards. But just for the sake of time, I'll kind of pass it back to Kara here because we can both keep going forever about our libraries.
I know, we love Motivity, so we can keep going on and on. All right, we will move on to challenge number 3. And Catherine alluded to this one earlier. For many people working in a school setting, it is very difficult to analyze data and ensure learner progress. And in fact, Catherine and I were speaking recently to a clinician that literally, in order to analyze data, has to get in her car and drive around and find those pieces of paper in the various classrooms and schools, look at the data, transcribe it all, and then say, okay, it looks like this has been mastered. Let's introduce a new target. Not only is that absolutely exhausting, but you're really not allowing enough time for a learner to really work on skills, because it's going to take a period of time to even let the teacher know it's time to work on the next thing. So this happens with a lot of our current customers, where when they come to Motivity, that is their number one complaint. Many targets are in progress for way too long with no prompt feeding. You know, some targets just aren't getting taught the right way, and they don't know that until they are physically in the location looking at the data in the binders. So with Motivity, the solution here, it's absolutely amazing. It's going to blow your mind. You can see data collected live. As someone is collecting data on the app, you can be logged in on your phone, on your iPad, on your desktop, and you will see those data coming in live. Everything is graphed right away. If a technician is in a session, they can see their own graphs as well, and they can look at previous data. And all of your phase changes are automated. So as the BCBA, when you go in and you say, okay, for this learner, we're going to work on 3 targets at a time. If you add in a whole target list, the second that one of those targets is completed, the next one is added into the list for teaching. So actually, one of our clinical trials required us to look at learner progress and to look at that cumulative graph of mastered targets over time. And we found a very significant increase in the number of targets that were completed in a short period of time once people were actually able to build in those automatic transitions. And I don't have the exact numbers or data on me right now, so I won't quote it, but it was quite significant. And that's what we're seeing overall. So Catherine, take it away and show us what that looks like.
All right. So again, I'm just going to keep orienting everybody to where we are as I'm kind of jumping around here. So we are now in a different student, Sophia. And again, here are the different goals or programs we're working on Sophia on the left side. When I click into that, I'm going to see the targets that are associated. As Cara mentioned, we have the ability to set up automatic transitions between phases. And so it takes a lot of that guesswork out for your staff, as well as for you yourself as a clinician. You're not trying to go around and make sure that targets aren't either in the wrong phase or maybe stuck in a phase that they needed to move on. And therefore, programs aren't being mastered as quickly as you need them to. So for the sake of the example here, I can go ahead and I'm going to make my target meet criteria. You'll see as soon as I've met my criteria, this is what your staff will see. It's going to transition to the next phase. In this case, we're looking at 1 foot away from the teacher now. Once I select this, my phase itself has actually changed, as well as my options for data collection. So now we can see in terms of my options for data collection, if they're requiring additional support or if that staff's having to get a little bit closer, we're going to store that as an incorrect response versus if they're engaging in the activity at the desired distance or what your teaching distance is, then that's going to score as a correct response. Again, the way that we're able to set up that data collection takes any additional thought from your staff. All they have to identify is what they did, and Motivity does the rest for them. As Cara mentioned, we can now see that graph. So there isn't a ton of data for this specific student. We'll show some graphs with a little bit more data, but just to show you how real time. We can see every time this specific target transitioned into a different phase, in this case, a just different proximity to that teacher, that phase change line is available for your graph. Nothing extra you're having to do. Additionally, this is the data that I just collected a moment ago. We can see who collected it, what exactly I collected, and that timestamp. So that's what we mean when we say Motivity is real time. You can look at the data that you just collected now. And we'll talk about the graphs in a little bit more as well. Additionally, what's beneficial is not only that our targets are going to transition between phases, but let's say a target gets mastered and we don't want a learner or a student to then either have no targets or maybe just have 1 target. We always want them to be working and increasing the number of skills they're acquiring. This is actually the same program we saw a little bit earlier in our student Joe. But now we're going to look at our day-to-day, and I'm going to collect data, and this learner is going to do amazing. What I first want to point out, because it's almost even hard to catch, is the 2 targets we're currently working on are towel and toilet. Looks like we're in a bathroom phase. So I'm going to go ahead. My learner is doing amazing today. And now my target is going to transition to completed or mastered. We now see that the 2 targets available are toilet and popcorn. Interesting. But again, because one of my targets has been mastered, the system says, depending on how you set it up, we are ready to move into our next target so that your students are always working on these goals and progressing through them without ever being stuck or needing you to go in and maybe do that extra analysis once you're fluent with the system. Okay, Cara, are you with Merida? Okay, perfect. So while I was talking, Cara was working some magic. So we are in a different learner now, and we are in a section called Timeline and Report. This is really a history of the learner. Everything that's in progress floats to the top. Anything that's completed for this learner shows up in reverse chronological order. So it looks like Cara might be in a session now. She is. Because Cara is in a session, and like we said, everything in Motivity is real time, we can click into the session that Cara's on. And here I'll show that I'm not collecting data while Cara's doing this. And everything that
This is me on my phone.
everything that she's doing is showing up and available. So if you're maybe in a different classroom, maybe you're in the same classroom as the staff that's collecting data, but you don't want to have to do what I've had to do in the past and reach over their shoulder to see what their data that they're collecting, you can actually just pull up that session data live and see everything that your staff is collecting. Or like I said, maybe if you're lucky enough to have an office, you're in an office and you know that a student is with an aide in another classroom and you want to see how data is going. Maybe you see right away, okay, they've thrown 4 times. Maybe I'm going to go walk over to that classroom and see what's going on, see if you could support. It just makes it really accessible to not only capture that data you need, but know how things are going for your students at any given time. While we are in here, as I mentioned, we are also going to quickly talk about our graph. So I quickly showed a graph in that other view, but we want to show also more in depth or maybe a more clinical view to looking at those graphs. And we'll go back to that timeline and report section in a little bit. Programs in progress is really where you're going to analyze all of the data that's been collected and make any adjustments you might need to. You'll see that my different goals are separated into these different domains. So we have behavior tracking, skill acquisition, and then maybe any assessments you're also completing. At each of these levels, I see this gray chart here. That indicates you have the access to a cumulative graph if you wanted to pull that. As Cara mentioned, we know in the school setting cumulative graphs are important, but also really beneficial when you're kind of setting up those automatic progressions and transitions. Within Motivity, there's a few different ways to classify targets. So we could say it's already mastered, it's completed, they knew it when we tested it in baseline or did some sort of probe, or it's currently in maintenance, but we're not considering it fully mastered yet. When you pull a cumulative graph, you can either aggregate all of those together or you can split them up. This learner is a great example where it can be helpful to see them split up. They didn't have any that they knew in baseline. It all was through teaching where these different targets were acquired. Underneath the graph, you can also see all of the individual targets that this learner has mastered, as well as your dates. So if you wanted a quick overview of maybe when things were in baseline or how quickly they're being mastered, you can always quickly pull. When you select on any of these targets, it will also take you right to that graph. Speaking of, we'll also just show you what an individual program graph looks like. So we'll go into our skill acquisition programs. Depending on how you set things up, you can have that long-term goal associated here. And then if you want it to include a reference of maybe where you're actually pulling this goal from. In this case, it's the BB map again, but maybe if you do the Vineland, talked with a lot of schools recently using ABLES. So anything like that, you can always include those references. Regardless of how you set the program up, though, you're always going to get this high-level overview up here. How long it's been active, when it was last run, so that's what Cara just ran now. How many targets are not introduced, how many are in train, and if you had a mastered target, how many are in maintenance or have been mastered. Once we click into that program, we're able to see the individual target graphs associated, and you can see here more of those gray charts. That just again means you can pull a cumulative graph at that level as well. Very quickly going into our target graph here, just moving our faces around. We can see the data that was collected. I can adjust my date range as I need to, either in these kind of lumps of time or a specific date range over to the right there. Underneath my graph, I'm going to get that weighted average for whatever date range I'm looking at. It seems so silly because electronic data collection has been around for a bit now, but in every other system, I was calculating this out myself, so it's one of my favorite features that I always like to point out. For the different colors you're seeing on the graph here, you're going to set up some criteria on the back end for a program. In this example, I have it set up to be 80%. All of my green data points tell me right off the bat, those sessions met that criteria or above. Any of these red data points indicate that I have not met my criteria. Very quickly, a few other ways that you can add some extra analysis to your graph. You can see here we have a trend line. As I adjusted my date range, that trend line also adjusted, and that will pop up for any data path with more than 3 data points. And you can always get rid of it if you need to. Additionally, you can split by staff, which I find to be particularly beneficial in a school setting or just from talking with current customers. As we know, especially in a school, you can have people jumping in all the time and working with different students. So if you need a quick overview of how is a learner doing with one staff as opposed to another, or maybe they were with a different aide for a week and you just want to quickly see how did things go when just that, aide was working with them, for example. Underneath your graphs are also all of your raw data. So if you ever needed to quickly see raw data, again, here's the data from Cara. We see her name, the timestamp, and each of our trials timestamped as well. All right. I went a little bit over time, I think so I'm going to pass it back to Cara.
That's all right. Awesome. we're actually going to take this a little bit step further now, because this is a perfect segue, because challenge number 4 that I have highlighted here is I don't have enough time to complete all of my paperwork. And we know that a lot of times that paperwork does have to do with creating and analyzing graphs. So of course, we're going to take it out a step further and look at how we're evaluating progress as a whole and how we're writing all of those reports. Now, this is a specific story working with a BCBA in a specialized school. When they first came over to Motivity, they were saying our BCBAs are so burnt out. As we all know, teachers spend so much time outside of work completing IEP documents and reports. And then it just becomes more complicated when all the paperwork is not in a centralized location. So it's logistical problems, there are compliance issues. We have a current customer that was saying they had to implement a lockbox to have staff put it into their car for drive time. So they were really quite thrilled when Motivity presented this solution of really having everything on the system, completely customizable report templates, ability to import the data, so no longer do you have to sit there and type out trial by trial, and everything is stored in one place, whether you need progress reports, incident reports, parent communication logs, speech assessments. You can build it all on Motivity and you can all have it there. So huge time saver for staff, and we will show you some really cool examples from our current customers.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna do this from a kind of zoomed out to a zoomed in way. So, oh, I thought it was muted. Zoomed out to a zoomed in way. So I'm gonna start with some examples of different documentation options that we have. Then we'll show what an actual report might look like and where that information is also coming from. So we're back at the Motivity Public School organization or school. We're going to look at the different note templates or documentation available. As Cara mentioned, these are all just examples. Our note template builder is extremely flexible and extremely robust. It was designed intentionally to be able to meet all clinical needs. And I'll show you a few examples that we have here. Similar to our libraries, once I click into a document I'm interested in looking at, I get to see a simulation view. We're really big about simulations on Motivity, so people can really test their tools before anything's live. Here we have an example of an IEP summary report. Anywhere you see this blue information, that means it's auto importing, and I'll show you in a moment where that information is coming from. All of these other sections your staff are able to fill in, and this form might be beneficial where I know even myself, it can be difficult to read an entire IEP report or maybe fully digest that information. And so great for maybe giving this information back to a caregiver or maybe disseminating it with the student's team for those that were not able to attend the IEP. In terms of template options you're seeing here, though, we have different tables, sections where you have fill-ins, different drop-down boxes, as well as all of these different multi-select options as well. Additionally, we have a monthly progress report. So again, all of these blue sections, meaning it's auto importing. And here we can actually have it set up where all of our data, as well as maybe certain dates that are going to be important, can also auto import. Huge time saver if all you have to do is identify where this goal is and maybe, or not, however you might want to do it, include a comment on current performance. We'll talk about more of these different note template options here, but just to show that in addition to having these more clinical forms or documentation, you can also really just have forms and documents that might meet all of your needs within that school. We know how important it is to get documentation if there is any sort of seclusion or maybe an accident and injury report. And so all of these forms you can create and have centralized in one location for that learner as well as for your school. So everybody's always able to pull from that same location. As I mentioned, we're going to go from the zoomed out to the zoomed in. So here are some examples of different documents you can create. Here we actually have a document that we built out for this specific learner. So here you'll see that instead of in those blue sections, those sections are actually filled in. So auto importing, huge time saver, but we have sections that maybe I'm going to go in and fill out. This background section can also just completely auto import. So if you have something that's If you have something already set up for this learner, you don't have to worry about doing this separate or multiple times, because all of that information can just pull in for you. Then, as we mentioned, your data can just auto import into these reports. If you wanted to include sections about a goal status or maybe a text line about current performance, you certainly can. But if you really just need to quickly see what's that data for this past month, what's my average, for example, you can just quickly pull that information. And I'll just kind of quickly scroll through here just to show you for the sake of the example. If you have your graph set up to include a trend line, that can auto import as well. I know one of the teachers we spoke to recently, we showed her this. She hadn't fully transitioned to Motivity yet. They were about to get started, and I was showing her this, and I swear she was going to start crying because she's like, I just spent my whole weekend doing it. So we know how beneficial it is to be able to, one, not have to work on your weekends, but just quickly pull this information that you need. I'm going to scroll a little bit faster for the sake of time. As you can kind of see, we're able to pull in that long-term goal or whatever your IEP goal might be. But again, that data being able to just auto import with your weighted average underneath is a huge benefit. As I mentioned up at the top of this report, we have a bunch of information. Sorry if that's making anybody dizzy. We have a bunch of information that's auto importing into our report. So these sections here. All of that information is coming from your learner's profile. So every learner has a profile in Motivity, and you can include whichever information might be helpful. We do have certain sections like name, of course, that are standard, but all of these different note sections, so what the student likes, what they need to have with them at all times, if you want to include a really cute picture, and then that background and family structure. So again, this information, if you're updating it throughout the time you're with that student, rather than having to rewrite it in a report, you can just auto import that section as well. Now, finally, where does all that information store? So where are these reports actually ending up in Motivity? And if you can probably guess, it's in that timeline and report section for each of your students. This section, as we talked about previously, is really a history of your learner. So the actual session data is going to pop in, but any sort of documentation that is filled out will store here as well. So you can quickly use our filter option. I'm going to filter by note, and now I can see all of the different clinical documentation that's associated for this student. We'll talk about this in a little bit as well, but again, this could be your clinical documentation, so your monthly progress report, but we can also see here different accident and injury reports. So really helpful to have that information stored in a centralized location, so whoever is on the clinical team for this student has access to those documents really easily and accessibly.
That is a perfect segue, Catherine, because our next challenge is collaboration. And we often speak with customers that prior to using Motivity, they were unable to find a system that worked well for everybody that they're collaborating with on the learner's team, which often includes multidisciplinary providers like speech OT PT, and of course the caregivers. So whether they are looking for tools for the speech and occupational therapists, or perhaps they are looking for a way to collaborate with caregivers and provide homework assignments, they weren't able to find a way to do that. And so Catherine is going to show us customizable tools for all of these collaborators and how it can all be stored in one system.
Thank you so much. All right. I'm just going to pull up a different screen first. I know we are running short on time, so I am going to try to run through this a little bit quickly just so we can get to that last challenge. But as we've been mentioning, but haven't shown yet, all schools in Motivity will have these different roles and permissions on their account. And so here we are in the roles section. And once I'm in a role, I see all of the different permissions associated. And we have them across all these different levels: learners, libraries, learner groups, and so on. So we can see how each of these different roles, you can customize their permissions accordingly. So for example, maybe a caregiver, you're going to give different roles than what you're going to provide for a teacher versus the BCBA versus your OT or SLP. So you're really customizing what is their experience on Motivity, so you can take away anything they don't need and make sure they have access to what they do need. Not only makes maybe the platform more accessible, but just kind of removes any sort of extraneous factors or features that aren't relevant to them, and also helps with avoiding any sort of HIPAA violations, of course, as well. So you can assign for OT, for example, just the students they're working with. Same thing with SLP, your special education teachers. We have these different learner groups. And oops, sorry, not those. Our faces are over it. These different learner groups. And so you can put students into those different classrooms. So again, only people on the account are seeing what they need to have access to. As we briefly went through as well, we have our libraries. So maybe the elementary school or middle school type libraries aren't relevant to SLP and OT because these are more related to either behavioral or different IEP goals. And we know that for OT and speech, their goals are going to look slightly different. And so you can have different libraries associated with those different service types and just put goals relevant in there, or allow them to just have access to build and establish their libraries as well. We already showed briefly the different training options. So we have training specific for caregivers, OT, and speech. Again, just allows them to learn the features on the platform that are most relevant. And then very quickly, we also have these different session types. So up at the top here, we are in a section where you would be going in to collect data for a student, and we have these different session types. That allows you to further customize where a speech only needs to see the session maybe associated with speech, and they can have the goals relevant to them. And they can also build the programs using their jargon. I know for me, some of the speech stuff just sounds a little different. So but if I'm not using it, that's okay, because for this SLP, they're able to customize their programs and use the language that they need to while they're collecting data. I apologize. I know that was kind of a very fast overview, but like I said, we do want to get to that last challenge that we have here.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone wants to stick on, we could also show a few templates and stuff that we've set up for caregivers, some really cool stuff. But we will get to the next one. I think this is a super important one to talk about. A lot of schools are very concerned that they do not have devices for all of their staff members. And they say, how am I even going to do electronic data collection? We use paper pencil because we cannot give everybody a device. So it might even be different by location. There is a particular school that we're working with, and there was very little budget for new devices. Like many schools, the teachers per policy are not allowed to use their personal phones. And then in some locations, there's just one laptop per classroom. And they said, we're bought in, we want to use Motivity, but how the heck do we do this? So we were able to come up with a really nice solution for them. We have a bulk data entry that allows you to go in and just put everything in. So what they actually do is they start everything at the beginning of the school day, and then as they're able to, the teachers run over to the computer, pop their data in, and they're good to go. Motivity is a browser-based solution. So what that means is it works wonderfully on any browser, any device, even those that are more cost effective. So if you have a bunch of Kindle Fires, guess what? You can use Motivity on it. You do not have to go to the Apple Store and invest in an iPad Pro for Motivity to work well. We do also have printable data sheets if that is something that you want to do. And then, like I said, your staff can always run over to that computer and put in that bulk data. So Catherine, show us what that looks like.
We will go ahead and start with that printable data sheet. So as Cara said, every student, you can access the data sheet and print it out as needed. Nothing you have to do separate. It's all already built into the system. Any programs that are there for that student are available for you. And you can include or exclude different sections in here as well. So maybe you want to include this protocol section because you want to have the teaching instructions, as well as maybe the instrument so that your staff can kind of easily see what they're collecting data for. So here we can see we're including that protocol, and so those teaching instructions are there. Really makes me think back to that kind of binder option. Hopefully you can avoid this just so you have that graphing option available for you. But again, we want to make that accessible and not something you're ever having to do separate. As Cara mentioned, we also have the bulk data option though. I do have an interval that's running. So with Motivity, we have this interval that you see up at the top here. So we're in our collect data view, and I can make intervals active or inactive however many times I need to throughout a time that I'm working with a student. Down at the bottom, I see my interval as well as up at the side here. So depending on what's easiest for your staff to collect data, I know for myself, it's really helpful to just have something at the bottom. You'll see here that as my interval's running, I've missed a couple intervals that I could be collecting data on, and that's why the system is flashing red for me. However, we have a school that starts this at the beginning of their day or the beginning of the hour, and they use our bulk entry feature. I only have a few intervals that have passed, but just to show you an idea of what that looks like, I'm going to click on these three dots here, and I'm going to go into bulk entry. Now I can say, all right, for the past 3 intervals, they did behavior occur at least once in the interval? No. And then I can quickly add that information. For 3 intervals, of course, that's fast, but imagine you have 20 or 50 intervals, makes it all that much faster. That bulk data option is also available across all of the different skills or targets you're working on. So you can always bulk add if that's helpful for you. Very quickly with behavior reduction though, for example, it's very similar. We do have that bulk data entry option. I can use my arrows, or I can bulk by just manually putting that information for our duration, which I know is really helpful. It can be so difficult to get to a device right away. I can use my timer, or I can say that just happened for 8 minutes and I did not get to my device because I was dealing with behavior. And you have that information as well. All right, I know we're about over time. I only got to a few of the things there, but just to show the significance and how beneficial that bulk data entry option can be.
Absolutely. And you also have an option that if you are entering data from a previous day, you can always go in and create your session that way as well. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to end with a really nice anecdote. We have a current customer that when they came to Motivity, they said that the state that their school program was in, it was really more of a crisis management scenario, and their goal was to move to learning opportunities, which I think, of course, is the goal with any school-based ABA program, or really any school-based program in general. And by utilizing these tools on Motivity, they were able to start in such a way where they were able to collect very quickly some ABC data on the behavior that was occurring in the classrooms. And because they were able to get that anecdotal information, they were able to put behavior plans in place. And then once they started seeing that crisis really start to go down, is when they were able to present more learning opportunities, bring the learners to less restrictive environments. And really, I think that's the goal with everything. So we're just so thrilled that we're able to provide a solution that works so well for public schools so that we can support our learners in that way. And there is one question. Catherine, can you just quickly show us what it would look like to communicate with a caregiver on Motivity? What are some ways that we might be able to do that?
Yes, absolutely. Some of my favorite of the clinical documentation we have on here. All right, because I was so used to having to make these by hand, and with Motivity you don't have to. And also just knowing how important it is for caregivers to get that information if maybe their students aren't able to relay it in the same way. So with our note template builder, as we mentioned, it's extremely customizable and flexible. So here we have what we might call a caregiver communication log. So it allows that caregiver to actually provide some information to the teachers or staff that might be working with them. So here we've set it up about what time did they wake up, what did they eat, really important, when was their last bathroom trip, and then maybe some summary information information about how that weekend was. Is there anything that they enjoyed, any fun stories or any additional notes? Really helpful if maybe all of a sudden your student is loving Peppa Pig. And so you're like, I'm gonna maybe have some Peppa Pig themed activities this week or something like that. Additionally, you can have a little note about if a caregiver is maybe running low on some of the materials that they need at home as well, or any questions they might have. And so it really improves that communication and ultimately collaboration between caregivers and teachers. Alternatively, you could have kind of that reverse where teachers are now able to give a summary back to the parents about what the day looked like. So how did social skills group go? What was their favorite activity that day? Same thing with really important about toileting, what they ate or drank. So especially the caregiver knows maybe what snacks or not snacks to give at the end of the day, and anything that they might need. So if they're running out of some of extra clothes or things like that. So again, really improves that communication, allows you to build it on a centralized location, but also communicate really easily with caregivers about such important things to really improve that student's day and overall time while they're in school. We want school to be enjoyable for everybody, and this is definitely a way that we can improve that.
And I think it's so important too for caregivers to know what happened in the day, especially when their child might not be able to tell them as many details as they would like to hear. So I love that. Two follow-up questions, Catherine.
Yes.
The first one is, are parents able to log into Motivity, or do you need to send these separately?
Great question. Here we'll go back to our different roles that we saw before. So you can absolutely have caregivers on the account, and you're just going to customize their different roles and permissions. So you're of course going to just give them access to their student and their child, but they can absolutely log in, see all of the information that you're giving them access to. So as we saw in that timeline and report section, a caregiver could quickly see either the data or any of the documentation that might filled out. Also really helpful if you need a caregiver signature. So maybe you have completed an accident and injury report and it's going to require a parent's signature. Parents can go in and log in from their account to Motivity and provide that signature right away.
Awesome. And are these templates customizable?
Yes, extremely customizable. So what we have here are just a bunch of different examples that current schools are utilizing on Motivity. But as we mentioned, the template builder is extremely flexible and really robust, designed to meet your different needs. So I would say please send it our way. If you have a certain document or form or report that you'd want to see in Motivity, definitely send it to Cara or myself. We probably spend more time in here than we would like to admit. And so we can definitely help build that out for you and be able to send it back to you so you can see what that specific documentation will look like on Motivity.
Excellent. All right. Well, it looks like we answered everything. We will
Awesome.
be sending a follow-up email. Please reach out to us with any questions and have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.